Good to go? Okay. Well, let's get started with the afternoon. Thanks, all of you, for coming today and then for sticking around this afternoon. Really appreciate it. I kind of cut to the chase for the afternoon. I'm going to give a little overview here of kind of the brainstorming process we want to do, but that's ultimately kind of the plan for this afternoon, is we want to utilize all of your guys' brains to help us think a little bit about pathways for Palmer Amaranth. And the impetus for that is, you know, over the past few years, as we talked about this morning, we've done a lot of work on the seed pathways and feel really good about the things we've done. But now with Palmer showing up in Minnesota and a couple other situations, and that's, you know, been more the norm for other states, it's making us step back and think about what are the other pathways that we haven't considered as thoroughly that we should be. And so we're hoping that, you know, as a group we can work that out a little bit more. Who saw the title of this slide and kind of scratched their head, or this talk and kind of scratched their head, like, how does this have anything to do with Palmer Amaranth? What I'm going to do is talk. So my name is Mark Abrahamson. I guess I should start with that. So I'm the Division Director for the Plant Protection Division at Department of Ag, which I work with Denise and Tony and our folks on Emerald Ash Borer. And my background is as an entomologist. So that's, you know, Palmer is not something I've worked with a lot. It's been new to me over the last couple of years working with these guys. But I'm looking at it a little bit different framework. And so I have done a lot of work with Emerald Ash Borer over the past years. And as getting more and more familiar with Palmer Amaranth, seems to me there are a lot of similarities in terms of the situation in which we find ourselves with Palmer and also with Emerald Ash Borer. And I think with Emerald Ash Borer, we've had some success in trying to do things that are hard and complicated, but ultimately pay big dividends, slowing the spread, keeping it back as long as you can. And so I guess that's kind of where I want to kick us off with the afternoon, is the value of dealing with a complicated problem that has really messy solutions. So as silly as it seems, I think EAB and Palmer really do have a lot of similarities in terms of the problem themselves. And number one is that neither one is going away. They're going to keep coming at us here in the Midwest. So EAB is going to continue to spread throughout Minnesota and the Midwest, and so is Palmer Amaranth. And that's inevitable. But it's, as we've heard this morning, it's not inevitable how quickly that happens. And I think we could all agree that the longer it takes, the better. Another similarity is they both have a lot of opportunities for spread, but in kind of different ways. So Palmer, been hearing about, there's a lot of possible pathways for the seed to follow, whether it's equipment or manure or in contaminated seed or through waterfowl. With Emerald Ash Borer, it's a lot simpler. Basically, it just moves in wood. However, the way that there are a lot of pathways is there are a million different ways that people move that wood, or a million different types of people who can move that wood. So that's been a real struggle with Emerald Ash Borer, is that we have a problem that there's a lot of value in trying to stop it from spreading and keeping it from getting to other places. However, at the end of the day, it's impossible to do that purely through a regulatory approach. So it's a messy solution. I see the same thing with Palmer Amaranth. There's no way we can pass enough regulations to keep Palmer Amaranth from spreading. That's not to say that there's nothing that can be done. Another thing I see that's real similar is that management for both is possible but really complicated, and it's not done at the statewide scale. It happens at the local level, whether it's an individual field or it's an individual community or an individual woodlot owner. It's the local level that feels the pain of having to do that management. And it's, again, a complicated thing. And I think true for both of them is the best way to deal with it as a manager is not to have to deal with it for as long as possible. So for all the parts of the Midwest that don't yet have Palmer Amaranth or don't yet have Emerald Ash Borer, we're doing them a big favor by making that time take longer for them to get there. So the longer it takes, the longer you have before you have to start worrying about managing these things, the better. And there are big incentives to doing that. So we think about Emerald Ash Borer, slowing down the spread gains us millions and billions of dollars worth of benefits that we get from trees that are not yet being killed by Emerald Ash Borer. And we can think of the same thing for Palmer Amaranth, all the benefits we get from systems that aren't invaded by it. And all of the additional costs that come along too. So not only are there environmental benefits of slowing these things down, but there are huge economic impacts as well. And so there has been some EAB economic analysis that's been done looking at how much value there is in slowing the spread of EAB, and it's billions of dollars, you know, that can be realized by, you know, slowing the spread to an extra 10 years or whatever. I think it would be really interesting to look at the same thing for Palmer Amaranth in terms of, that message carries a lot of weight when you're trying to convince people to, take a course of action or to support a program when you can lay out the dollars and cents that can be realized. Okay, and so like I said, I feel like I've in some way kind of been through a lot of this already about 12 years ago or so with Emerald Ash Borer. And so I think it's worth kind of walking through kind of the experience we went through with that pest and kind of highlight some of the similarities I see now in dealing with Palmer. And one of the biggest issues that I've realized with Emerald Ash Borer has always been the potential for misinformation. And so whenever there is a lack of information about something, it allows for people to misinterpret or to have misinformation crop up. And that's really where I've seen problems show up with Emerald Ash Borer, and in terms of trying to work with people and manage situations is if there's a lack of information, bad things happen. And that was really true for EAB because Palmer, we're pretty hands-off except for in our CRP plantings where we've burned them all up. But EAB was really draconian when it was first found in North America. Basically what happened was if Emerald Ash Borer was found in your property, every ash tree got ground up and removed from that property, and every ash tree from a half-mile radius around that property got ground up and destroyed. And then if Emerald Ash Borer was found in the course of that, then it went out another half-mile. So this was a big source of consternation for people when we were talking with them, 12 years ago, let's say 2007, and there was a lot of concern. Like, why would we want to cooperate with you? Because you're telling me that if you find Emerald Ash Borer on my property, you're going to show up with a bunch of people with chainsaws. I'm going to lose all my trees. So why would I want to do that? So it was a big hurdle for us, and I see some similarities again with Palmer in terms of people not wanting to report where it is, fear of what the consequences are going to be. And the way that, and I'm not saying that what should happen with Palmer is exactly what happened with Emerald Ash Borer, but I'll just tell you how we dealt with some of those things with Emerald Ash Borer. But the way that we dealt with that with Emerald Ash Borer is that we had to write a response plan. And the purpose of that response plan wasn't so much that we then knew what to do, but it was so that we could tell people, okay, if this situation happens, this is what we're going to do, so that they could understand what the potential consequences were for them in terms of participating. And then we were able to highlight a few different situations which were perhaps, I guess I'll get to that in another slide, but so it provided some information for people, and then it also provided obvious lines of communication so that, again, there wasn't the potential for misinformation. So if there was a find of EAB, here's how we were going to tell people about it. There was a clear line of how the information was going to move through the line of command or line of communication, and then a clear order of operations. Okay, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And like I was saying, we had to kind of highlight some different situations. And so I'm thinking, there might be some similarities with there in Palmer as well in terms of like finding it in an agricultural field versus a conservation planting, kind of what happens. With Emerald Ash Borer, what we needed to do was to tell people, when the chainsaws came out or when we just, showed up with some outreach. And so we had a few different scenarios. So the first one was Emerald Ash Borer discovered at a place before the beetles had come out. So let's say a firewood pile that had just come from Michigan. And so that would be a situation where anybody could look at that and be like, yeah, clearly you should just get rid of that wood, burn it up, whatever, and eradicate it. A middle scenario was if Emerald Ash, so if we found that firewood pile but it was after the beetles had come out, okay, now you got a problem because now the trees around that are potentially contaminated. So people might still agree, okay, I can see how you've got a pretty limited site here. It might make sense to get the saws out and cut down those additional trees because it keeps Emerald Ash Borer out of this area for a little bit longer. Maybe we can buy into that. And then the last one, which is also by and large pretty much how Emerald Ash Borer always gets found, is somebody finds a tree or somebody finds a beetle and you don't know where it came from. And by that point, we were fortunate in that at that point as a program at the national level, there was enough experience that people were not as gung-ho for eradication at that point. So we could put down on paper, if we're in this situation, we are not going to come and remove your trees. And this helped to get a lot more participation in terms of reporting things and participating with us in monitoring. and et cetera, et cetera. But this was, it was pretty limited. We're talking about a very small aspect of a big problem, because just like Palmer with emerald ash borer, there are a lot bigger issues in terms to think about, like how do we prepare our forests to be more resilient against this insect? How do we develop potential management plans or actions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we found that with emerald ash borer that where we started was too limited for more broadly looking at the problem. So that response plan was pretty much just limited to what do you do when you find it. It was all about Department of Ag at the state and federal level. And a lot of our partners participated in that, but there wasn't much of a role for them to play in that. So what we ended up doing was broadening that response plan into something that we call the readiness plan. And so that response plan ended up just getting folded in as a part of that broader plan. And what that did is it wasn't so much about like we needed it written down for us to know what to do, but it was a great way for us all to have discussions like this and for people to see, well, here's an opportunity for my organization to play a role in trying to help with this problem. And that broad plan kind of set the stage for taking a more long-term perspective in dealing with the problem. So you can think about it like having a big goal, which was that readiness plan, minimizing the impacts of EAB. That was kind of the overall goal, and then we had multiple components within it about keeping EAB out for as long as possible, preparing people through education, preparing our forest, developing political support. But again, where we started wasn't necessarily where we ended up in terms of planning for it. Okay, then after emerald ash borer was found in 2009, that's downtown St. Paul. After EAB was found, the planning didn't stop, and I would say, it still continues to be something that we do, to this day, but the planning efforts kind of shifted, so it wasn't so much about planning for its arrival and trying to figure out how to keep it from getting here, but it turned into things like preparing communities, managing forests with a big ash component, trying to slow the spread of EAB. Those are all good things. So the planning efforts kind of grew and grew to fit the problem. But from having a lot of discussions just like this with EAB, we did this for a year or two. We had a lot of discussions with stakeholders and partners trying to kind of lay the groundwork, and it really did. So even though things have changed a lot, we're 10 years since EAB was found in Minnesota, the basic communication structure that we were able to set up through discussions like this, through creating those plans, remains, and those partnerships remain. So, and I see great partnerships with Palmer too, and that has been really a strength in terms of trying to deal with emerald ash borer. And it is something that I don't have any slides particularly on this, but I feel like it's something we can hold up as having some success with. Emerald ash borer in Minnesota has spread relatively slowly in terms of where it is in the state. There's still a relatively small portion of the state that's affected. If you look at the nation on a whole, how quickly EAB is spreading, at this point, about a third to a half of Minnesota should be infested if it was moving at the same rate as it is through the country in general. I can't tell you that we're responsible for that slower spread, but we've probably helped. And the things that I think have been important that that we've done as part of that have been number one, not taking that kind of throw your hands up approach where this is a big messy problem, it's too complicated, it's going to affect too many people to try to deal with it. I think we've tried to take a very aggressive stance against emerald ash borer. When it shows up in communities, really trying to encourage those communities to take aggressive management to slow population growth of EAB and keep it from moving. And it's messy and it's not perfect, but again, if we look at it on the big scale, we've seen to have some success with that. So if we think about Palmer Amaranth and trying to translate some of those same components, we could think about minimizing the impact of Palmer Amaranth. That's a pretty big goal, and that's not our goal for today, but you could think about that as encompassing a lot of different things. But certainly, an important component of that, no matter what else fits into that, is trying to slow the spread. And again, kind of the same rationale as I went out before. So that's obviously what we're here to talk about today. And really what we want to do this afternoon, like I talked about earlier, is we want to use all of your brain power to help us map out some of these pathways of movement. So what are the potential ways that Palmer Amaranth is going to end up in different situations, and what can we do to interrupt that? So in particular, there's a few things we want to focus on. And I think number one is, who are the people involved? Because that's most important. Who do we need to talk to? And so I think as we're going through this work this afternoon, that's something we want to highlight. Who are the people, who are the organizations? And for those people or organizations, are there existing lines of communication already? Does somebody got a channel that we can use to communicate with this group? Or do we need to form a communication to it? I think another important component is, what are the vectors? And so, once we have those people we know we need to talk to, what do we need to talk to them about? So what are the vectors that we're most concerned about moving Palmer Amaranth? As we know, there's a million of them. I think one of the things we're hoping is that as we kind of work through these scenarios, that some will kind of rise to the top a little bit as perhaps ones we want to focus on more than others. And then along with that, and what are the types of sites that these vectors might be moving through as they're making their way to a field situation? And so, those are the three kind of critical things: the people, the vectors, the sites. And then if possible, also are there ways that we can think of that those things might be interrupted? And again, it's messy, right? There's a million of them. It affects people in lots of different ways to have to try to comply with another set of BMPs or what have you. But are there opportunities that some of these things can be filtered out of the pathway before they ever get into a field type situation? So I think what we're hoping for today, a couple outcomes will be, number one, if we can identify some of the places where we really just don't have the information we might need to make a good assessment as to how important something is, that gets highlighted. And then I think another thing, like I said, is that we are able to identify who are the groups. A lot of them we're maybe already engaging with, but just kind of a sense of who are the folks that we are talking with already, who do we need to talk about? And then finally, what do we want them to know, or it could be, what do we need to learn? It could be a part of that information gap where we don't have all the information that we need to make a good assessment. So full disclosure, I am not a trained facilitator, but I'm going to be, and that's never stopped me from doing anything I've been trained to do, but I'm going to try to act as one today. And we're going to do this, again, as not being a trained facilitator, we're going to do this very simply. So this is basically going to be kind of a brainstorm exercise. So what we're going to do is we will do this by groups, and we might want to group together a little more, so we've got maybe like 4 or 5 in a group, something like that. But what we're hoping to do is have each group go through 3 different scenarios and try to map out what the pathways are for Palmer to end up in each of those scenarios. So one will be conservation planting, one will be a roadside, and one will be in agricultural field. And I think that what we'll do is actually, based on kind of the discussion we had already this morning, it might make sense to flip those around and start with the agricultural field, because I feel like that's maybe of the most importance probably for most of us at this point. So that is the plan. So we're going to do 3 rounds of this. So what we'll do is we'll break up into groups. Again, we're going to talk about and plan to come back on mapping out these pathways with 3 kind of components identified: the people, the vectors, the sites. So we'll do that as groups, starting with the agricultural field. I think we could probably spend 20 to 30 minutes on that. Let's say maybe we'll just kind of play it by ear, and then reconvene as a big group and have each group kind of go through what they came up with. We'll mash them together and see what it looks like.